Ukraine is a modern, developed European country that finds itself in a situation that maybe we can compare in some ways to what Europe was like in World War II.
Being the eyes and ears of what's happening here and putting it in perspective.
Because as human beings, we don't relate to thousands of people, relate to that single individual.
Helena Sand Anderson is a Norwegian diplomat. Her career includes diplomatic postings at Norwegian embassies in Tehran, Kabul, and Tbilisi. From 2015 to 2019, she served as deputy director in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 2019, Andresen became ambassador to Georgia and non-resident ambassador to Armenia. From 2023 to 2025, she served as the ambassador of Norway to Ukraine.
Hello, my name is Natalka Cmoc. This is Off the Record. And today I'm here with a friend and very respected colleague, Ambassador Helena Sand Anderson. She is Norway's ambassador to Ukraine. And please, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor and a bit frightening to be here.
Yeah, I think it's really fun. The whole concept of this podcast is just so we talk, and we've been working a lot together, so it's sharing a little bit of our perspective. And I think it'll be particularly interesting since you sadly will be leaving soon. And so this gives you an opportunity to maybe give us some reflections on what it was like, what you'll be telling your successor, for example. But before we get to that, I think it'd be really interesting if you would share a little bit about yourself and your diplomatic career. Because from what I read, you really are, you're very impressive in terms of your regional experience. So you've been posted to Kabul, you've been posted to Georgia more recently, and so on. And so it seems to me that you have an expertise in Eastern Europe issues, but also in terms of more hardship areas. So if you're okay, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Certainly. As you said, if the last years I've been working in this region or with this region, although I started off my diplomatic career in Iran, followed by Afghanistan, I would say that being in Kiev doesn't compare to any of the other conflict areas I've worked in before, whether it be Afghanistan or civil war in Tajikistan or in Somalia. It's such a completely different and unique situation. I felt very welcome in Kiev from the very first day. You know that you're here to do a job which we're kind of in the same boat. We're here together. Mm-hmm. We share the same goals as the Ukrainian government, which is to find the best possible way to secure Ukraine's sovereignty, to uphold its territorial integrity, to help it reach its goal of being a country that still has the right, as every country should and must have according to international law, to choose its own future. And the threats which we face here in Kiev as foreign diplomats are the same as the Ukrainian people are facing every day. All the consequences of Russia's full-scale war against the country. So it may have helped to have some experience of hardship postings or conflict zones, but not all of that experience is immediately transferable, because Ukraine is a modern, developed European country that finds itself in a situation that maybe we can compare in some ways to what Europe was like in World War II, 80 years ago.
It's a really good point. I know that I spend time talking to colleagues in Ottawa because there is an assumption that, we have experience in Kabul, so we should be sending the same kind of people into Ukraine, and trying to explain to our capitals that, it's not the same and the conditions are not the same. And do you experience that as well?
Yes, and you hear very often that, you've been to hardship postings, you've been to the Balkans during the Yugoslavian wars or the Middle East. Yes, some of the things you learned, especially about personal robustness? Are you tough enough to be able to handle what is often a frightening situation, as all Ukrainians know? The sound of the drones, the sound of the explosions, relying on the very brave and hardworking air defense. Some of those things you might have tested with yourself before. And I think that's a very important point in which diplomats we should send here, that they can stand up to it. But, it also means that you have to, it helps to have a regional background. It does help to have experience of the Russian Federation, of working with them, of knowing what that regime looks like, and what their goals are, and what their rhetoric is, and how to interpret that, because then you can much better understand what Ukraine is up against, and you can filter in the way it should be filtered to give the best advice to your capital.
Many of the ambassadors here actually also had a posting to Moscow, and I believe you did as well. That's very common, very, very common. Do you think that it helps? One question. And the second would be, do you find that it's different?
Yes, it helps, because I was in Moscow from 2010 to 2014. So sitting there as political counselor, watching the change of leadership that looked like an election, but was just a switchback. I think there's a chess term for it that I can't remember, but the switching back between Medvedev and Putin, at the same time as watching how the Russian Federation was using every means to, including the war which started in 2014 or in connection with Maidan, but watching how Ukrainians stood up against their government on Euromaidan in the Revolution of Dignity to insist on a European future for the country, while the Russian Federation was trying to force all of its neighbors to join the Eurasian Economic Group, and started, or was intensifying its work to, let's say, rebuild the Soviet Union. And watching those little green men that were first denied when they appeared in Crimea, the annexation, it stood in such sharp contrast to what Ukraine was struggling to become and to develop into. I think that understanding is important, to have seen that, to have been there, and to see the contrast. And do I feel it like how do I feel it's like this is completely different?
Yes.
Kyiv is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and I am so fortunate. Every morning I get to walk from my residence to the embassy. It's about a 15-minute walk past St. Andrews, St. Michael, St. Sophia. I feel personally very safe and comfortable here. In Moscow, everything is very, very big. You feel it's oppressive, and you do feel, although I haven't been back since around 18, I think, it's just the atmosphere, the vibes, it's something very heavy, whereas Kiev is something light and beautiful. And also, every time I walk past St. Sophia, I think about the common history that we share between Ukraine and Norway, and how during civil war in Norway, we sent our princes here to what was at the time one of the most developed capitals in Europe. And we sent them here for their proper formation and also for safety. And we ended up having a Ukrainian queen. Elizaveta, one of the daughters of Yaroslav, was made Queen of Norway, and her name was Elisev when she became queen. But understanding this common history, this common heritage, what Ukraine was, Kiev Rus, when Moscow was basically Not much at all.
Yeah, mud roads.
Yes.
So it's interesting. I didn't quite connect that you were in Moscow when I was posted here previously here. So I was in exactly those same years here under Yanukovych. And I remember at the time I was the counselor for development, so international, we called it international technical assistance for the same reasons you mentioned. It's Ukraine is not a typical development program. So we didn't call it development. We called it international cooperation because we would be assisting more from a capacity building on certain areas that Ukraine identified. So we supported a lot. In fact, we just celebrated 10 years working with Ukraine on police reform, on judicial reform, and so on. So it took a very different focus. And under Yanukovych, it was a very different Ukraine. And I left just a month before the Revolution of Dignity, but you could feel it already brewing in the air. And then I came back not on a posting, but to develop some of our first security programs. And suddenly it shifted completely. So we were working on development and so on. And I mean, sort of democracy, human rights. And then we shifted a little bit more to a hardcore. But I did live in Moscow. We talked about this as well. I lived as a spouse, accompanying my husband, who was a diplomat and still is, earlier, so 2003 to 2007 in Moscow. And that was a time of hope. I hated it. I have to admit, I couldn't stand. We were there for 3 years. I really didn't like it. And you were comparing sort of the lightness of Kyiv and then Moscow. And I can say that at that time, Moscow had a lot of hope, but it was still not like Ukraine. I found it very heavy, very somber. People didn't say hello to each other. It was very difficult. Just living there was very challenging. 4 hours just to drive to the airport. So things have changed, and I love it here too. We've spent a lot of time talking about it. We both absolutely love Ukraine for many, many reasons, and not just Kyiv, but going outside. Yes. And yes, that'll be my turn at some point to also leave, and it's very, very difficult to think about because it is lovely and working with the people. We have been working quite a bit together. So how we met is we both volunteered to be the co-chairs along with Ukraine, and that's the Ombudsman Dmytro Lubinets. The three of us had the pleasure of co-chairing what was then originally called the Working Group Number 4, part of the peace formula that President Zelensky had launched. And this was point number 4 on the return of prisoners of war, civilians, including children. And now the working group is called Human Dimension, still the same issues, but we spent quite a lot of time working on that, and I got to know you better and just very much came to appreciate your deep expertise in the area and your passion on the humanitarian aspects. Were you working on this prior to coming here, or is this something you turned to while here?
I haven't been particularly working on prisoners of war or civilian prisoners or deported children, but it is connected to, as I see it, basic human rights and the concept of justice and accountability, which is something I'm very passionate about and always have been. So in that sense, I probably brought that very deep-seated feeling and passion into the work, and I saw it through that lens, because what's happening, I mean, stealing children from another country and denying their identities and their language and their culture and their history and eradicating their past is a form of genocide. Holding prisoners of war in conditions which are contrary to the Geneva Conventions, which we have all subscribed to, which are a part of international humanitarian law, and subjecting them to systematic torture, which we've heard testimonies of, and arresting people for reasons of, their belief or civic activism or doing their job as journalists. It just goes contrary to everything which is right, to the basic concept of justice, to many types of rights under the Universal Convention on Human Rights.
Mm-hmm. So we have spent a lot of time on this working group, and we've seen it evolve from the beginning to now where it is now. And I think we've seen a lot more countries join more, and I think we were described as the most active working group as well. I think we might be the only ones still operating. So I think there's many reasons for that. One of the reasons is that it's an issue that touches everyone. Everyone in the world can relate to children being forcibly taken and indoctrinated. And I can't imagine any person in the world not seeing that as a crime. So, but we've managed to attract to the working group every region of the world. So I think it's one of the only ones that have been able to do that. We just had a meeting in Zhytomyr, for example, so we were expanding it. And as you said, the testimonies, I think, spoke volumes in being able to raise the issue. So if I could summarize and then pass it over to you, I mean, I think our mandate, we as we had decided was, okay, what is it that's required and what can diplomats do? So we focused on awareness, we focused on advocacy, and we focused on and hoping to expand on sort of the coordination, not just on the donors aspect side, but also on the Ukraine side, since we're all supporting them in different ways, and how do you bring it all together? Advocacy is one of the areas that I ended up just really grabbing onto. I think, I don't know, we each as humans, it's not just as ambassadors, but as humans, something speaks to us. And I think for me, I really find it shocking how there's not enough known about it and not enough done about it. Just the very fact that people have been taken from their homes and illegally detained under false charges and then imprisonment without much justification, and their families can get access to them and so on basic things like medical information, where they are and so on. So we as the working group have started an advocacy campaign, and I'll just speak to that a little bit. But right now we're bringing attention to journalists. We're focusing on the journalists, and then each week we're highlighting one journalist and telling their story, because it's one thing to look at statistics, but humanizing the issue is by bringing it to an individual person and hearing their individual story. And I think it's effective. But do you feel that that's enough? Or do you think, like, what else? What are your thoughts on this? Again, you're departing. What you're going to be talking to your successor. How do you describe this, and what would you like to see sort of evolving from this?
It's a really good question, and it's a tough one too, because in the world we live in today of 24/7 available news, of every kind of channel on social media, you're in such a competitive news environment, and the only thing that seems to make headlines is something really quite terrible in big volumes of people. And then there is also factored into that, disinformation and propaganda at play, especially put into a very systemic form by the Russian Federation, trying to deny the truths. So we're working uphill. Mm-hmm. And I think the way in which you have spearheaded this most recent advocacy campaign, focusing on individual people, is the only way to get people's attention. But the thing is, how do we get their attention, and how, lend me your ears, get their ears to listen to that individual story? Because as human beings, we don't relate to thousands of people. We relate to that single individual. If you remember the girl in the red coat in the film Schindler's List, mm-hmm. That's what sticks in our mind. Yes. And she personifies what happens to everyone else. I think it's really challenging. I think we need to just continue to do as well as we can in bringing those individual stories to wider audiences, finding, if we can, new ways of giving them a platform for their stories to be heard. Our countries' embassies around the world have been engaged in the countries where they work with the local media, with the host country governments and so on, to try to bring the Ukrainian reality and truth to those countries, especially perhaps where Russian propaganda and disinformation is more strong. We have to maybe intensify that work and find also ways to support what the Ukrainian government has been doing, which is to bring people to audiences in other countries and provide a stage for them to deliver their personal testimonies, although that's a very hard thing to ask from somebody that's already been subjected to horrible, horrible things, to relive it again and again. But that is what touches people.
And you and I have done some, not just listened to testimonies, we've actually met with returned prisoners of war and heard their stories. So very, very difficult experience. And I've had people ask, oh, should this be what ambassadors do? And my answer was yes. I feel that the role of ambassadors are changing, and I've asked this our colleague, the Greek ambassador, as well, and because I think for a while now, a decade ago, people were wondering, do we still need diplomatic missions with real time? And I think now we're showing that actually, yes, diplomacy still needs to continue. There's still value. Do you think that the role of the ambassador is changing or should change in your perspective over your career? Again, tough questions, but I mean, these are questions that I ask myself, so I'm happy to answer them as well. But it's questions that I think are important questions because the world's changing around you, especially with AI and so on. And you mentioned public diplomacy, for example. Do you think there's still a role for traditional diplomacy, or do you think that this needs to also adjust to new areas? And if so, what would you recommend if you had a magic wand?
If I had a magic wand, yes, I think we need both. Is the short answer. I think that there is still value to traditional diplomacy. There is importance in understanding the formal ways of communication between two nations. There is importance to protocol because it reminds us that we are not here as individuals. We're here as representatives of our governments, of our countries. And sometimes when we speak formally, we are speaking on behalf of the head of state or on behalf of the government. So those formalities are important because that is, in that communication, that formal communication, that is what builds the trust and what you can rely on in what you say that will be the core of your relationship. So those formalities still matter, and what you can say behind closed doors as a friend is also important because it gives you an opportunity to pass messages that you might not want to do in public, because not everything can be dealt with effectively if it's announced through a microphone or in public. So at the same time, in order to engage and to understand the country, I mean, ambassadors have always traveled, but I think now in this current situation in Ukraine, in this full-scale war, it's our travel to different parts of the country, and perhaps particularly the east and the south, is very, very important, so that we, despite the risks, that we go and share the situation in which people are living under, that we are, that we set aside time to really experience and understand the hardships and the challenges and the needs, and to be inspired by those people that we meet in frontline villages. And to be able to bring that whole picture home, or to be able to inform our capitals about it. And to, as you said, we have to work in new ways, right? We have to be visible. We have to be out there. We have to be doing podcasts like this. You are fantastic on Facebook. I'm not good at that at all.
But it's changed.
It's changed. It's changed. Yes. And the expectations to diplomats and to ambassadors have changed, because they expect us to be much more visible and vocal, perhaps, than we were before. So it's finding the balance in that.
Yeah, I find it's changing as well. And I think we are far more visible than I think it occurred than our predecessors previously. And yes, and social media has changed our way of communicating as well. I think that this idea of witness is important as well, because traditionally we represent our government. So when we speak, we're speaking as Canada or as Norway. But the other way has grown, I think, in terms of being the eyes and ears of what's happening here and putting it in perspective, because there's more media. But ironically, there's less field offices now due to sort of the privatization of a lot of media. And so, not that we're replacing media, that's not what I mean, but it's not, you can't just rely on media to be able to understand what's happening somewhere in the world. And you can't rely just on the diplomats either. So it's like this multi-layered triangulation. Even the journalists that we're speaking about on our public advocacy that have been taken, many of them are described as citizen journalists, which is something that is quite known in Ukraine. It's people with their phones going out, recording what they're seeing in real time. They're not just calling a journalist and saying, you need to be here. They themselves take on that role and then write about it on social media. Anybody can start a podcast, apparently. So the way we hear information is much more varied, less controlled, but it's more susceptible to propaganda and disinformation at the same time. And that's something that's a hard balance to achieve. I find that interesting. Yeah, please go ahead.
I just, you sparked off another thought, because we're not here to replace media, and we can't compete with them because they'll always have newsrooms that work 24/7. But we are extremely important in supplementing what our governments at home read in the papers to give the full story, right? The other parts of it, the nuances.
I think too, so we also, what the public might not be aware of, is that we're called in to be witnesses within our own committees, for example. So within the Canadian system, the Foreign Affairs Committee, for example. So the decision makers, the elected bodies, and there's different committees, want to know more and can call up ambassadors to come and report on what we're seeing on a particular issue. And that's part of our democratic system. And I think that's very effective because, again, it allows them to ask the questions and get the information they need to be able to either validate something that's in front of them or propose something. And so ambassadors play a role in that, in terms of the policy formulation of our country's response. I don't want to overplay that, but I think I didn't quite realize what that role was till I was here, because it doesn't happen in every country. It's usually when there's a crisis or something occurring in that part of the world that we need to pay attention and then determine what we want to do. So, So.
We don't have that formalized system in Norway.
You don't? No, okay.
At least not that I'm aware of, because I've never been called and I've never heard any of my colleagues.
Really?
But we have it. I think we have the same possibilities to inform in a more, without it having been written down and formally summoned.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But yes, I've never had a job where I've been so close to the Prime Minister's office and
As this one.
Yes, as this one, and
Yes.
being asked to join in meetings or in travels and to advise. So it's a position which is very privileged and also carries lots of heavy responsibility. But I have to say, I'm not going to take credit for what's happened, but I am very, very happy to see that during the 2.5 years I've been here, there's been an enormous development of the relationship between Norway and Ukraine, and the Nansen package of support, which was launched in February 23, has grown immensely, and we are providing enormous amounts of, especially military support. There is an understanding in Norway that Russia's war against Ukraine doesn't only impact on Ukrainian security, it impacts on European security, directly on Norwegian security, on NATO, where both of our countries are members. And I can only hope that the sort of missiles I've been sending, not missiles, but reports, missives, sending home have contributed to that development.
So you're right about, so right now Canada is the chair for the G7 group.
Yep.
And we're stronger together than we are as individual countries in terms of making a point and or in our support. If we're coordinated, that really helps. There is a group of other countries that have grown in importance, and that's the Nordic-Baltic Eight, as they're lovingly called. And they've become very influential in the last year. Could I ask you just to describe what that is and how did it come about?
Well, I can try to answer. I'm not sure I know how it came about,
Yes.
but at the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Baltic countries were able to re-establish their independence. And their closest neighbours in their geographical region were the Nordic countries. So for those who might not know who that is, it's Denmark, it's Finland, it's Sweden, it's Iceland and Norway. And then, of course, the Baltic countries, more people probably know, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. We felt a sense of importance of helping them to reestablish their independence and to become part of the European family in every meaningful way, to help them to join NATO, to help them to join the European Union, even though 2 of the Nordic 5 are not members of EU, but we are very supportive of every country who wants to join the EU because we're so closely integrated as Norway.
Just like Canada.
Just like
We're in
Canada.
the same spot. We're one of our priorities is to help Ukraine join EU and meet all the
Yes.
accession requirements, but we're not an EU member.
Exactly. But however, as my Prime Minister said to yours,
Yes.
when they were both here in February with President Zelensky, Canada is also a Nordic
That's true.
country. And we, of course, bilaterally share the same values and there's many of the same goals. So the Nordic Baltics, I think, grew as a group when the Nordics were supporting the Baltics in their initial re-establishment of independence. And then it became natural to have among these 8 more formalized political and practical cooperation. And why I think today in Ukraine it's become a voice with some weight to it is because we have learned from each other as the 2 groups. The Baltic countries were very early on warning us about what Russian Federation represented and what its long-term goals were. And we were still living as Nordics, I think most of us anyway, in an optimistic frame of mind from the 90s, the early 2000s, as you said when you were in Moscow as a spouse, thinking that they shared the same goals of what their country wanted to be. And we thought these Baltic countries, they're a little bit too pessimistic and it's not quite like that. And I'm sure we can all get along. Now we realized although it took us a while, not even in 2008 in Georgia or 2014 in Ukraine, it almost took us to the full-scale invasion of 2022 to understand that, oh, yes, okay, we see a point now. we
Yes.
realize what you're saying. And at the same time, of course, there's been a development in those Baltic countries of hearing the Nordic discourse and understanding the way that we think and understanding why we think that international law is important and why the United Nations, while not perfect, is the basis of what we have. And rather than get rid of that, we need to work, to protect it, to protect the achievements that we've made since 1945. This has meant a great political unity of these countries, and I think a consolidation of the way we understand the situation in Ukraine, the way we understand the Russian Federation's goals and ambitions, and how we see the common threat and how we believe we should respond to it. And that has been made the Nordic-Baltic group of 8 nations a very united and clear voice in support of Ukraine.
And very influential. And it's nice to see, because I think there's great merit in the issues that you're raising. And like as you mentioned with Canada, the Arctic, of course, Arctic security, we share that, which is, again, Russia's involvement in the Arctic is something that we're also monitoring collectively. So it is an issue, and it just shows how countries and issues are very much united. I wanted to make sure that we reserved some time to talk about you here and more on a personal level. So one of the things I have noted about you and is your absolute beautiful collection of embroidered shirts and blouses. And maybe you shared a little bit of your passion about it, but you have quite a collection. Maybe would you mind sharing that? Because I think it's very impressive.
I'd be happy to. Very personally and very non-diplomatically, when I was appointed to be ambassador to Ukraine, I was so delighted because it meant that a sort of childhood passion of mine, which has always been embroidered blouses and folk dress,
Yes.
I could live it out every single day as part of my working uniform, because I absolutely adore vyshyvankas and the cultural heritage and the artistry that they represent. And there are so many beautiful variations of vyshyvankas and so much to learn about them. So, yeah, I have to admit that I have now a collection which is approaching 60 pieces, blouses, and then we're not counting the dresses, which could be 5 or 6 or 7 by now. Yes. I picked up the most recent one 2 days ago, which I especially had made to match my Norwegian national costume, because we also have a very proud tradition of national dress in Norway, which has many similarities. So there's the basic one is with a white linen shirt, which you could have white embroidery on or coloured embroidery. And I have one which is embroidered with autumn colours in the Norwegian, what we call rose style or pattern. So I took a picture of this to my absolute favorite place in Kiev, which is Narodny Dym, and said, could we order one which has these Norwegian autumn colors, but with Ukrainian embroidery pattern? And it turned out to be stunning, and I can't wait to wear it inside the rest of my Norwegian national costume.
That's beautiful, and it's a really nice way of connecting the two histories and the two cultures. As you said, it'll blend very nicely because of the color choice. I do like that vyshyvankas are very popular right now. It's part of expressing Ukraine. It's a Ukrainian expression of their independence and wanting to show the world that they're Ukrainian. Because when I was here previously, people in Canada would wear them, but it wasn't very popular here. But it is definitely become much more popular, and I love how various designers are picking this up, and it's had even an influence on non-Ukrainian designers. You're seeing echo of Ukrainian design in other designers. So I believe Ukraine has had an influence on the design world and have modernized their own traditional outfits and styles. And so it's been a real pleasure to collect myself, not to the same extent, but I am envious of what you've done. But I have seen your blouses, and they're absolutely spectacular. So, and I've been with you when we went on a trip somewhere, and you had to duck into a store to go check on a blouse. So I was like, very interesting. Is there anything else that you're bringing back home with you?
Oh, my heart is absolutely full of the stories and the histories of people I've met here. The way in which I've been welcomed, not only by the government, but by everyone we meet, by the quiet heroism of everyday people, by the amazing personal bravery and fortitude of, for example, everyone in the Superhumans organization, and the way in which people are showing how they rebuild their lives, and how that is also, for example, now it's very common to see amputees with prosthetics in the public life in Ukraine, which is such a huge contrast to how it used to be when people with disabilities were hidden away. So, bringing back that very positive vision of inclusiveness and how Ukrainian society seems to be changing and embracing values that we share is something I will recall with great fondness, and I'm going to find ways to continue being involved with Ukraine even when I go home and I'm no longer working here.
I'm sure you will. I have no doubts you will. That reminds me, yesterday I went to see para-hockey, and you were talking about... so para-hockey and other sports are becoming much more popular, and a lot of veterans, especially amputees, are able to join a lot of these sports as a way to keep active, keep socially active, and I think are going to end up making really competitive teams in the Paralympic world and the Invictus game. But regardless of whether they compete or not, I think it's a really dynamic way of inclusiveness, because you also see the public coming in and supporting them and cheering them on, and it's a very positive side of this society. And I will miss you. And I think you've contributed an immense amount to Ukraine. I know that Ukrainians will miss you. And so I want to wish you personally all the best in your next assignment. I have no doubts that we'll see you again in some shape or form back to working on Ukraine issues. And I look forward to that. Before we end, we were just going to flash our sweatshirts as part of, which is different than the working group, but connected to the working group. It's the International Coalition for the Return of Children. So you mentioned that at the very beginning. We're all working with Ukraine on this Bring Back Children initiative. So I'll just show the front, you'll show the back, just to the cameras.
Yep.
And it's just to bring attention to this. So... so this is the front. It's thousands of children stolen from Ukraine. And then the back, you'll show this one.
Bring kids back. They must come home.
Yeah, so there we go. I'll show the back as well. Okay, so We will continue with this campaign
We
as
certainly
well.
will.
I had the pleasure of speaking with Ambassador of Norway to Ukraine, Helena Sand Anderson. It's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast, and an enormous pleasure to have been working with you and to have met you. Did you have any final words before we part?
Your Excellency, dear Ambassador, dear Natalka, and very, very dear colleague and friend, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for challenging me. Thank you for thinking of inviting me to your podcast. Thank you for being such a great colleague and supporter of our work. And it's been an honor to work with you in the Human Dimension Working Group. And also to learn from you. You set a wonderful example of what an ambassador should be and what a modern ambassador actually is. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!